denied the report since it is one of the world's top recipients of US military aid, receiving $1.3 billion in military financing annually. And then the news of spying and eavesdropping, not just on rivals but also allies. There are documents revealing US espionage on Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Putting up a brave front, Ukraine's defense minister questioned the veracity of the alleged Pentagon document leaks, downplaying its negative impact.
As for the leak, it was certainly unpleasant to hear things like that, but I carefully reviewed information which was available publicly. There is a lot of information there, which does not correspond with reality.
However, Russia's response was measured since Moscow is still carefully analyzing the documents, but it did not miss an opportunity to strike out at the US.
I can't comment on this. This cannot be excluded. We saw that the leaks are quite interesting, and they are being broadly studied, analyzed, and largely discussed. The fact the United States has long started spying on various heads of states, especially in the European capitals, it has repeatedly popped up.
The leaks say Washington was spying on South Korean officials as they include details of private discussions between senior Korean officials about US pressure on the Asian ally to help supply arms to Ukraine and Seoul's policy not to do so. This could have a devastating impact on the ruling party in South Korea, with the opposition South Korean Democratic Party seeking answers from the government. There is also a lot of criticism against those leaders who may not have followed America's line in criticizing the war, including the world's chief diplomat, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who, according to the leaks, is so determined to save the Black Sea Grain Initiative or the grain deal brokered by the UN and Turkey in July last year, following fears of a global food crisis, at least too accommodating of Russian interests. According to reports, the leak may have started on a site called Discord, a social media platform popular with people playing online games. The documents labeled no foreign, which means not for foreign nationals, now has landed in the hands of America's arch rivals. So what is at stake? Not just the information, but it compromises sources in various countries that help the Pentagon gather information. The sanctity of confidential documents remaining confidential is important because lives depend on it. In this case, many of America's sources could be compromised and their lives endangered.
Now, France is quite uniquely positioned in the current geopolitics of war as also ties with Russia and China. Despite Paris's continued support for Ukraine, French President Emmanuel Macron reaffirmed his long-term goal of strategic autonomy for Europe during his visit to China. The visit comes as Macron caused a stir by saying Europe has no interest in accelerating the conflict in Taiwan and in becoming a vassal in the US-China conflict. However, if this was an attempt by Paris to draw Beijing into influencing Russia to end the war, one must remember that this is an era where national interests run supreme and trump even aligned interests.
French President Macron has been facing stiff opposition back home, and now he's receiving a lot of flack from his Western allies over his foreign policy decisions, especially his recent visit to China. Emmanuel Macron flew into a storm of criticism after he said Europe should not become a vassal and must avoid being drawn into any conflict between the US and China over Taiwan. And I quote what he said, "Do we, that is Europeans, have an interest in speeding up on the subject of Taiwan? No. The worst of things would be to think that we Europeans must be followers on this subject and adapt ourselves to an American rhythm and a Chinese overreaction." The visit was closely watched and monitored by the West, and while they continue to show confidence in Macron, initial fissures are quite visible with France and beyond.
Again, on President Macron, do you have a response to him saying that essentially Europe doesn't want to be seen as following the United States' lead on China?
Again, I'll let President Macron speak to his comments. We're very comfortable and confident in the strong alliance and the strong friendship that exists between our two countries, and the fact that we have been working together on the continent, and elsewhere around the world with France, whether it's, I mentioned the Indo-Pacific, certainly on Ukraine, in Africa, in the Sahel, going after terrorist threats there. I mean, there's a lot of terrific bilateral cooperation just alone between the United States and France. We're focused on that.
We all agree that stability in the Taiwan Strait is of paramount importance. We have a very clear interest in preserving this stability, the peace, and the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, and therefore nobody should unilaterally change the status quo by force in this region. The threat to, or the use of force to change the status quo is unacceptable, and it is important that the tensions that might occur should be resolved through dialogue.
Macron's comments on Taiwan have elicited a very sharp reaction from some of the US lawmakers.
So I think this is a good moment for us to ask Europe, does Macron speak for all of Europe? Is Macron now the head of Europe? Is he now the most powerful leader in Europe? Because if he is, then there's some things we're going to need to change. Number one, Europe, including France specifically, has depended heavily on the United States for 70 years for their own defense. In fact, when Macron tried to play global superpower and send troops to North Africa to fight terrorists, he couldn't even get his own troops there. We had to fly them there, and we had to fly them back. He couldn't even get his own troops there. So if they're going to break off on their own and follow Macron's lead, that's going to save us a lot of money.
The visit to China was a critical one for France. The two nations inked a record $3.06 billion deal to construct and deliver 16 ultra-large container ships. The deal, signed between the world's largest shipbuilder, China State Shipbuilding Corporation, and French maritime transport company CMA-CGM Group, marked the largest single contract by value that a Chinese shipbuilder has ever received. The other big announcement was from the aviation sector to open a second Chinese assembly line to double its production capacity. The French aerospace firm had previously set up its final assembly line Asia in North China's Tianjin municipality back in 2008, where it has built hundreds of aircraft.
China is ready to strengthen macro policy coordination with the EU and opposes politicizing and weaponizing exchanges on trade, science and technology. China is willing to work with the EU to jointly maintain the security and stability of industrial and supply chains and create a favorable environment for cooperation.
中国发展进程。
China is the largest single-country market for Airbus, accounting for about 1/5 of its global deliveries. The country's aviation market is expected to continue to grow in the coming years. But while France tries to explain the difference between strategic autonomy and strategic trap, Macron himself is entangled in a bitter domestic face-off which followed him during his visit to the Netherlands.
Where is French democracy? Where did we lost it?
I can answer this question if you give me some time.
You have millions of people in the streets.
While Macron was praised for inviting von der Leyen to join him in Beijing, China's cold shoulder to her and excluding her from the pageantry of a state banquet and military parade highlights China's attempts to divide and rule, with many concluding Macron's China visit is a complete disaster.
A series of deadly airstrikes by Myanmar's military junta on a civilian crowd has sparked widespread condemnation as witnesses recounted the horror of the attack that could be the junta's deadliest since a coup 2 years ago. Myanmar's military said it carried out a deadly attack on a village gathering organized by its insurgent opponents this week, and if civilians were also killed, it was because they were being forced to help the terrorists. This was a ceremony that was being held by the National Unity Government, a shadow administration that stands against the junta, for their Armed People's Defense Force, which aims at restoring peace and stability in the region. Now, up to 100 people, including children, were killed in the airstrike in the Sagaing area in northwest Myanmar, according to media reports. More than 5,000 people have fled from eastern Myanmar into Thailand in recent days as combat between Myanmar's army and armed resistance groups has intensified in the border areas. Myanmar has been in turmoil since the 2021 coup ended a decade of tentative reform that included rule by a civilian government led by Nobel Peace Prize laureate Aung San Suu Kyi. Time for a short break. On the other side, we have an interesting report on how Leicester in the United Kingdom has become the first city with white people as minority. Stay tuned.
Yet there's been a lot of talk about the money going to China because of the gap in valuations, reopening of China this year, etc. But how do you see these two? Because you track both carefully. But between China and India, what will suck in most of the emerging market capital which is coming back?
You must remember, China has a number of advantages at this stage. As you know, China underperformed India dramatically in the last few years, and now it's beginning to turn. That's number one. Number two, the Chinese market is very large and very liquid. If you compare the market capitalization of China versus India, you'll see that there's a huge difference. So for the large institutional investors, they really don't have much choice but to go to China. So if they have a basket of emerging markets funds, they might put 10% in India and maybe 40% in China. So you can see that China is still very attractive from that point of view and will continue to be so.
Is oil a factor at all, Mark? Because, we have this issue of crude imports and crude prices have started moving up once again. I mean, do you have a view that crude climbs above $100 once again? And if it does, where does that leave this India versus China question?
Well, the good news for India is that they can get cheap crude from Russia, as we saw what's happening in Ukraine.
Today. Now, this year, Leicester's famous multiculturalism, so praised by the establishment, exploded. Knife attacks, stone and bottle throwing cars, torched, religious symbols under siege, dozens wounded, including policemen. Britain's streets became a battleground for Hindu-Muslim rift. According to a report by Rare Foundation in the UK, Leicester became the first city where white people are a minority. So what happened? According to Rare Foundation, Leicester became Islamized fast. In 2001, the Muslim population was 11%. By 2017, it made up 20%. For the first time since the 7th century AD, England is no longer majority Christian. The UK government-led multi-agency Prevent Programme review predicted that as India heads towards the 2024 elections, fissures affecting the subcontinent are resulting in a worrying mirrored response in the Indian diaspora in the UK. From the Hindu-Muslim unrest in Leicester last summer to the attack on the Indian embassy by pro-Khalistan separatists, a Pakistan-driven anti-agenda sentiment is inflaming tensions in the UK, according to the report and Prevent's review. We spoke to Charlotte Littlewood, a Henry Jackson Research Fellow. Here she explains the report and the analysis. Take a listen.
Our policy and our law is robust on tolerance and equality. We haven't been pushed to enact any kind of blasphemy laws here in the UK, again, on the back of the push of some elements of the Muslim community, to again be confident that our laws are not moving in a way that is replicating the will and the want of Islamist extremists here in the UK. But we do need to remain very strong on our values, that we have here freedom of religion. Therefore, extreme blasphemy ideology has no place in the UK. We have freedom of speech and we have tolerant respect of different faiths and beliefs. We're multicultural, we are diverse, and we need to remain equal and tolerant of one another. And the largest threat to that equality and that tolerance in this country is Islamist extremism.
And here's World at a Glance with some stories from across the world.
Brazil's President Lula da Silva met with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in Beijing on Friday. Lula and his wife were welcomed by Xi and First Lady. Upon their arrival, the Brazilian president said he will suggest to Xi a proposal to mediate peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. North Korea says it has tested a new solid-fueled intercontinental range ballistic missile, the Hwasong-18, the country's nuclear counter-attack capability. The missile, fired from near Pyongyang, flew about 1,000 kilometers before landing in waters east of North Korea. To develop a solid-fuel ICBM has long been seen as a key goal for North Korea, as it could help the North deploy its missiles faster in the event of a war. Bahrain and Qatar announced their decision to officially restore diplomatic relations. According to official sources, the two countries reviewed the meeting and decided to resume diplomatic relations. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Egypt broke ties with Qatar and put sanctions and a boycott on it in June 2017, accusing it of supporting terrorism and undermining regional security. A tropical cyclone Ilsa smashed into Australia's northwest coast as a Category 5 storm. It has largely spared populated regions. The storm was downgraded by the Weather Bureau to a Category 3 system early on Friday. Ilsa is expected to weaken to a tropical low overnight and move into the southern parts of the Northern Territory. Heavy bursts of rain are forecast in some areas, likely triggering flash floods. As US President Joe Biden left the houses of Oristas on Thursday, he took the opportunity to hold and pose for a photograph with a newborn baby. Biden's ancestors had emigrated to the United States from Ireland after the famine in the 1840s. Biden has followed in the footsteps of John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton in addressing the houses of Oristas during his 3-day trip.
That's all in this edition of World Today. Stay tuned to India Today for all the latest news and updates.
Make your media plan smarter with India Today Live TV on your connected devices. Amplify your brand with 100 million smart internet viewers. To advertise, mail us at sales@aajtak.com.
are watching India Today.
Good evening and a warm welcome to India Today. I'm Pallavi Saha. These are the headlines we're tracking at the top of this hour. Kejriwal launches scathing attack on the centre, says ED and CBI misleading court, claims agencies torture suspects in custody.
ईडी ने और सीबीआई ने झूठ बोल के कोर्ट पे एफिडेविट पे कोर्ट को गुमराह किया और झूठा सबूत उन्होंने कोर्ट के सामने पेश किया.
Karnataka ticket Karnataka intensifies. Siddaramaiah loses out on Kolar seat ticket to only contest from Varna now. Turncoat Sabdi gets a ticket from Atni. Atiq's son Asad cremated in Prayagraj amid massive security. Don Atiq not allowed at son's funeral. Bus falls into a gorge in Maharashtra's Lonavala, killing 13 people and critically injuring over 25. Chief Minister Shinde takes stock of situation, visits accident spot. Bomb scare at Japan PM rally in Wakayama. Attacker who threw smoke bomb apprehended. Prime Minister Kishida rescued and is safe. The Supreme Court has constituted a bench for the hearing in the same-sex marriage case. The issue regarding legal recognition for same-sex marriage to be heard by a 5-judge bench led by Chief Justice of India D.Y. Chandrachud. The bench comprising of CJI D.Y. Chandrachud, Justices Sanjay Kishan Kaul, Ravindra Bhatt, Hima Kohli and P.S. Narasimha to begin hearing the petitions on Tuesday, April 18. Nalini Sharma is in fact joining us live at the moment. Nalini, a big step as far as this entire case goes because a lot of spotlight has been on this case.
Yes, Pallavi, and if you remember, the last time around when the hearing had happened, while the Supreme Court was deciding how to go about the arguments, it was the centre that had suggested the matter be referred actually to a 5-judge bench because it included and involved certain important constitutional questions, especially regarding the fundamental rights of those coming in from the LGBT community. So keeping that in mind, the Supreme Court had referred the matter to a 5-judge bench, and now finally this 5-judge bench has been constituted. Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud, who has been an icon when it comes to LGBT rights in India, who's known for his judgment in the Navdeep Singh Johar case that had decriminalized Section 377, is himself leading this bench along with several other eminent judges, including the second senior most judge in the Supreme Court right now, Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul. So from Tuesday is when this hearing is going to start before the Supreme Court. It's going to be extremely crucial for equal rights for the LGBT community because for a long time they have now been demanding for legal recognition of same-sex marriages so that they can be given the equal rights as spouses in heterosexual marriages. So keeping that in mind, it's going to be a very important hearing. From Tuesday, the Constitution Bench is going to start hearing the matter, and it's going to take some time for the Constitution Bench to conclude the hearing and finally come up with its judgment. But Tuesday is when it's kicking off, so lots to watch out for in the coming week.
Nalini, at the outset, you did mention about some of the constitutional questions that need to be addressed when, of course, looking into this matter. Could you throw some light on that?
Well, Pallavi, if you remember, when Section 377 was decriminalized and the landmark judgment regarding homosexuality had come in from the Supreme Court had categorically said that although they're decriminalizing homosexuality, all of the corresponding rights like right to marriage, right to property, any spousal support, all of those questions the Supreme Court's not going to get into at that point. They had left those questions open for future litigation. And recently, over the past couple of years, we've seen petitions come up before different high courts as well as the Supreme Court asking for same-sex marriages to be legally recognized under the Special Marriage Act. Because right now, the Special Marriage Act only talks about marriage between two persons, but they interpret that to be a man and a woman and not same-sex marriages. So keeping this in mind, a lot of petitioners from the LGBT community itself had approached the Supreme Court and various high courts asking for these matters to be taken up. Now, the Supreme Court had decided that they are going to be taking up all the matters themselves. That's why all the matters from across the high courts in the country had been transferred to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court over the past couple of months has been deciding how to go about this hearing, considering the crucial questions it involves. Now, the centre had specifically stated in the last hearing that this is a very important constitutional matter because it's going to set the course for future constitutional rights for the LGBT community, along with bringing about changes in the marriage laws that exist as of now. Okay. So he'd asked for it to be heard by a 5-judge bench, which is now going to happen from Tuesday onwards.
Okay, Nalini Sharma, thank you so much for bringing us all of those details. Tainted BJP MLA Virupakshapa gets conditional bail in bribery case. Virupakshapa bail condition is to appear before the Lokayukt police once in 3 weeks. It is also to surrender his passport. Bail condition must not destroy evidence. That is what has in fact been set as a condition to grant bail to the tainted BJP MLA, who in fact lost out on a ticket for the 2023 Assembly elections because he is mired in a corruption case as we speak. He was arrested and now he has been granted bail, but on certain conditions, which include appearing before the Lokayukt police once in 3 weeks. Also, he has to surrender his passport and in fact, he must not destroy evidence is what the bail condition states. Anika Keshav is now joining me live on this. He might have received some amount of relief, but as far as his political future is concerned, that did suffer a dent when the BJP, of course, because of the corruption taint on him, decided not to give him a ticket. Anika.
Well, that's right, Paul. His future as far as the politics.
Okay, we'll try and just reconnect with Anika. There seems to be some audio problem over there. But this may be some amount of relief for Virupakshapa. But this also has certain conditions attached. He will have to appear before the Lokayukt police once every 3 weeks. Don Atik's son Asad has been buried in Prayagraj. Here are the top developments on that story. Amid heavy security, Asad was buried in UP's Prayagraj. Only close associates were allowed to attend the funeral. The bodies of Asad and Ghulam were brought from Jhansi, where they were encountered by the UP STF team on April 13. Atiq Ahmed, who saw the court's permission to attend the funeral of his son, was not allowed to attend it. He and his brother Ashraf are being grilled by cops in the Umesh Pal murder case. When the funeral was taking place, 2 burqa-clad women tried to enter the graveyard. When asked to show their ID cards, they refused and started arguing with the cops. The suspicion was that one of them could have been Atiq's wife. Atiq's wife, Shaista Parveen, who is also one of the accused in the Umesh Pal murder case, is still absconding. She is likely to surrender soon. Meanwhile, the hunt is on to nab Guddu Muslim. Burial of gangster Atiq Ahmed's son Asad was held in Prayagraj today. The last rites were performed amid heavy security, with only those closely associated with the family attending the funeral. Don Atiq sought court's permission to attend the funeral, but she was not allowed. Here's a detailed report.
Days after meeting his fate, Don turned former Samajwadi Party MP Atiq Ahmed's son Asad was buried in UP's Prayagraj on Saturday amid high security. The bodies of Asad and Ghulam were brought to Prayagraj from Jhansi, where they were shot dead in an encounter on Thursday. Prayagraj was turned into a fortress for the burial.
On the day of the funeral of Asad, heavy security force have been deployed here at the Chakia area, and you can see in the visuals how the UP police is all set and all ready to take the charge and control if any adverse situation arises.
The bodies were directly taken to the graveyard.
यहाँ पे कई रस्मों के बाद इनके अंतिम संस्कार की प्रक्रिया शुरू। आप देखेंगे 100 को कांधा देने के लिए काफ़ी संख्या में लोग भी आए हैं और अब उनको यहाँ पे सुबह खाक होना है। बाकायदा इस कब्रिस्तान में गड्ढा भी किया गया है।
In view of the security situation, only close associates of the family were allowed to attend the funeral. Atiq, who sought the court's permission to attend his son's funeral, was not allowed. The last rites were performed as per Assad's religion, after which he was buried. While the last rites were taking place, two women in burqa tried to barge into the graveyard. They refused to show their ID cards when stopped by cops and started an argument. Cops first suspected one of them could be Atiq's absconding wife, Shaista Parveen, but that was not the case. With Assad's encounter, Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath has once again showed his determination to make UP mafia mukt. Now the cops have intensified their hunt to nab Guddu Muslim, the remaining shooter at large. With Abhishek Mishra and Anand Raj in Prayagraj, Bureau Report, India Today.
My colleague Abhishek Mishra is now joining me live from Prayagraj on this. Abhishek, the funeral of Assad was in fact performed today. Atiq Ahmed wanted to in fact be there, but he was not allowed as far as the court is concerned. But in terms of nabbing the others in this case, because there was some confusion, we believe, at the graveyard itself when two burqa-clad women came. In terms of nabbing Shaista Parveen and Guddu Muslim, where are the police at with that?
Well, yes, on one hand, Assad's body has finally been buried under the soil, and this is just the result of the kind of crime he committed, the encounter which was done in Jhansi, and now today at the cremation ground in Prayagraj, his body was buried. But as far as the investigation and nabbing, Shaista and Guddu is concerned, the police so far has not revealed anything. But yes, they are saying that they're constantly trying to get the location of them. Earlier, it was said that Shaista probably will surrender.